It's the boy Blackbeard. I'm back with happening. Salute. What I want to do in this tape is we're going to deal with some more, of course, indigenous history. But I want to kind of focus more on the Spanish colonialism and the different Portuguese colonialism that happened actually, quite a while before the quote unquote United States colonialism. Okay. So although today, we are speaking English and we are very, very familiar with the British Crown, the United Kingdom, and basically that side of what we call the Caucasian world. Prior to that, we were having a lot of war and a lot of conflict with more of a Latin speaking or so-called Spanish speaking Catholic Church Christianity, more of that amalgamated form of a pale Caucasian person. All right. So, in the late 1400s and throughout the 1500s, a lot of the conflicts and a lot of the different issues that we were having here came from the encounters that we had with the amalgamated Spanish and whatever indigenous people came with them from Europe or so-called Africa. But nevertheless, it was a Spanish-speaking culture, or what we call a Latin-speaking culture, is what we initially had our problem with. This is why when you look in South America today, you see a lot of the Catholic Church influence. And that's why when you talk to most so-called Spanish-speaking people or so-called Mexicans, or basically a lot of people throughout the, South America and Central America, why a lot of them are Catholic and why a lot of them speak Spanish. And the reason why is because it's that leftover influence from the Spanish invasion. So I want to connect basically how the Incan Empire and the Mayan Empire, when we talk about the Empire of Israel, as far as how it pertains to the Americas. And sometimes when you brothers and sisters hear these, these Hebrew Israelite people, when they say that the 12 tribes of, Israel correlates to the various so-called Native American tribes, and you will see them include, some of the different tribes of Peru and basically the far western part of the so-called North America. Okay. And we'll look a little deeper into where they get that from, because there is something very, very peculiar between, we're going to say the tribe of so-called Judah and the western part of North America and what we call in the Mayan Empire. Okay. So what we'll do is look at a variety of maps, and then I will be reading out of a book that is called America, A Narrative History. This is how the book looks. So once again, it's America, A Narrative History. America, A Narrative History. That's how the book looks. But anyway, I'm going to read out of this. And then we're gonna break this shit down. So primarily, like I said, you had the Spanish and you had the Portuguese, but primarily the Portuguese colonized the western portions of Africa. Okay. And a lot of who came over here were the so-called Spanish. So these were who, we were encountering in the late 1400s, early 1500s. Okay. What I'm going to do is, basically we're going to just read this stuff, as usual. We'll analyze it and put all the pieces together. Throughout the 16th century, no European power other than Spain had more than a brief foothold in the New World. So keep that in mind, that throughout the 16th century, okay, or the 1500s, that no European power other than Spain had more of a foothold in the New World. And this is primarily because whatever connection that those indigenous people of Southern Europa, or those so-called Moors of Africa and Europe, whatever connection that they had over here, is what led to, with them falling, these Spaniards coming over here. So don't put in your mind that those Moors over in Southern Europe or the coast of Africa, that they had a connection over here, but it was completely colonial. It may have been something a little more along the lines of international trade. As I've said one time before, if you have the Bloods and the Crips fighting against each other, then, I may find the Blood sect, let's say in Florida, right? But I know that they originate in California, and that's the home of the Bloods. Okay. So I'm going to go out to California basically to fight against the rest of them because, the territory that they owned and the ties and allegiance that they had to Florida is why these two places are connected like that. So this is what I kind of think what was going on, you know. So yes, there were some colonial aspects, but there may have been even some type of trade between these indigenous Americans that we call in the Maya and the Inca and these Muslims of the East, you know, that we call the Phoenicians, you know, so-called Egyptians, Arabians, etc. So then it goes on to say Spain had the advantage not only of having sponsored the discovery, but also of having stumbled on those parts of America that would bring the quickest profits. And you would have to ask yourself, well, how would Spain know to do this? And also, before I go deeper into my reading, I want you to look at a map real quick. So what we have right here in front of us is a map dealing with the Americas, of course. And when you deal with the legend right here, all what you see right here in green basically is colonial Spain. OK, and what you see in here in blue is basically former Portuguese colonies. But primarily, this is Spain colonizing this stuff. Now, this is the narrative and the story that they tell you. And I want you to think very, very closely when I tell you this. They telling us that so-called Christopher Columbus came across the Atlantic Ocean from southern Europe and the coast of Africa, right? So that would be the east. So that means that he came from far over here in the east. You got the Atlantic Ocean right here and the Pacific Ocean right here. So my question is this. If he's coming from the Atlantic Ocean, how did he know about all this stuff over here, which is what Spain primarily colonized? How did he have information about this over here? How did he know to come over here? You see? So just keep that in mind. That means that they had to have known a little bit about what was going over here. You know, so they had to have known a little bit of something. All right. Also keep this in mind because we're going to be talking about all the invasions that happened basically throughout this entire area. So when we talk about the Mayan and the Incan Empire, this is what we're talking about. All this. This is the Mayan and the Incan Empire. OK, right here. So continuing on in the reading, it goes on to say, while France and England struggled with domestic quarrels and religious conflict, Spain had forged an intense national unity. Under Charles V, heir to the throne of Austria and the Netherlands, and Holy Roman Emperor to boot, Spain dominated Europe as well as the New World. The treasures of the Aztecs and the Incans added to its power, but the easy reliance on American gold and silver also undermined the basic economy of Spain and tempted the government to live beyond its means. There's another thing I want you to keep in mind, too. Sometimes if you see the, I think it is the royal dynastic lineage of the Incan Empire, and it's a picture, and it shows all the royal monarchs. Right when it gets about the early 1500s, late 1500s, if I can remember correctly, you will see a Charles V of Spain as an emperor of the Incan Empire. But prior to that, you see all these other Incan emperors, but they are indigenous to the Americas. So it's very, very interesting because the Charles V or whoever this character is, that's this Incan emperor in the early 1500s of Peru, he looks just like the rest of the Aboriginals. So if you look in the picture, you're not going to be able to tell that he looks any different. But you're going to see that this is the emperor or the king of so-called Spain. But it's a copper colored person. So you just kind of ask yourself a wonder, you know, I guess I'm wondering is how would this emperor be of Spain, you know, all of a sudden have power in Peru? Just kind of keep that in your mind and ask yourself that. So moving on, it goes on to say that for most of the colonial period, much of what is now the United States belonged to Spain, and Spanish culture has left a lasting imprint upon American ways of life. So think about how, once again, like I said, these American lands were colonized first by these Spaniards. OK, so they had a certain influence in the Americas. All right. It says the Spanish borderlines of the southern United States preserve many reminders of the Spanish presence. The earliest known exploration of Florida was made in 1513 by Juan Ponce de Leon, the governor of Puerto Rico. Meanwhile, Spanish explorers skirted the Gulf Coast of Florida to Veracruz, scouted the Atlantic coast from Key West to Newfoundland, and established a short-lived colony on the Carolina coast. So now let's look at this. So it says right here that the earliest known exploration of Florida was made in 1513. Okay. Very, very critical about that exploration in Florida in 1513. So that means if they have been invading you since 1513, that means, and then the whole so-called United States didn't get set up to the late 1700s. That means that you were warring with Spain for a few hundred years before you even started fighting the United States. So your original enemy was Spain. Okay. Also, too, it's very, very interesting how a lot of names of these different so-called explorers, you see them as names of so-called streets, and you also see them as names as counties and certain cities. Like, for example, in Atlanta, you have a Ponce de Leon, which basically is a long road that leads into downtown Atlanta. But it's very also interesting how this same character named Ponce de Leon was a so-called explorer of Spain. So they have a tendency to name things after them. Also, another version is that you have a Custer Rd, for example, in South Georgia by Fort Benning. It's a military base, but in Fort Benning in South Georgia, they have a road near it called Custer Rd. Now that's very, very interesting because General Custer was also the same United States general that helped them seize and steal land from Aboriginals all throughout the South. So it's no coincidence that they have a Custer Rd right next to Fort Benning, Georgia, because the Creek Aborigines and the Muskogee Aborigines of Georgia, that's who they were fighting. So it's also no coincidence that they have a Columbus, Georgia, which is not too much, which isn't too far from Fort Benning. So think about how they have a Custer Rd, a Columbus, Georgia, and a Fort Benning, all near the Muskogee Creek Aborigine territories of Georgia. So that goes to show you why they were in those areas and what they were doing. Okay. So those military bases such as Fort Benning and stuff in South Georgia, now you all know why they're there. And that city that they got called Columbus, Georgia, now you know why it's called Columbus, Georgia. And you know who more than likely came there to seize and steal land. More than likely it was somebody of Spanish influence, because Columbus goes back to Cristobal Colon. Okay. So we're going to look at a document, another one right now. So we can just see here, we've got another map right here. But the area that we know of as so-called Mexico, they naming it New Spain. So keep this in mind. But you see it right here, it's ran by the Mayas. So they call it New Spain, but it's ran by the Mayas. And down here, they also have the Peru and the Inca Empire down here. But notice they also show you who was colonizing and who was going where. So let me go through this real quick. So, for example, this guy named Pizarro that you know of, he came south into the Inca Empire in Peru. Another explorer by the name of Nunez de Balboa, he came through the area of Hispaniola down into Peru. This guy Ponce de Leon went between Florida and the Santo Domingo Islands. Okay. This guy named St. Augustine, once again, was in Florida. And I think we have a St. Augustine in Florida. That guy named Cortez that you all know of came from Cuba and sailed into the Aztec Empire of Tenochtitlan. Okay, so Hernan Cortez. So it shows you, the different explorers or colonizers and the areas they went. But basically, in the ancient world of America, all the key empires where all the gold was, all the resources and where everything was kind of popping was in the areas of what we call Mexico and the entire western part of North America, the areas of California, Utah, etc. Now, keep Utah in mind because that's going to come up again in a minute. So going back to the reading. So the Spanish Southwest. The Spanish eventually established another permanent settlement in what is now known as New Mexico, Texas, and California. Eager to pacify rather than fight the far more numerous Indians of the region, the Spanish used religion as an effective instrument of colonial control. So the first thing I want you to know is that when these Spanish invaders came from the areas of, Tenochtitlan, Peru, and basically what we call Mexico, they started coming a little more north into the areas of what we call Texas, like I said, Utah, California, etc. But as they came up there, guess who they met? They met the Aboriginal North Americans, who basically were the Mayans, the Incans. These really are all the same people, come from those same primary Aboriginal North American families, Central American, South American families. But they saw it was so damn many of them that they knew, well, we can't keep fighting and going to war with these people because it's too many of them and we don't have the resources. So they started using a lot of the religion. And this is where the whole pale-faced Jesus thing got very, very useful and popular for them. So a lot of those early, Jesuit missionaries and stuff like that with the pale-faced Jesus, it came from the Spanish. All right. So it says, missionaries, particular Franciscans and Jesuits, established isolated Catholic missions where they taught Christianity to the Indians. After about 10 years, a mission would be secularized. Its lands would be divided amongst the converted Indians. The mission chapel would become a parish church, and the inhabitants would be given full citizenship of Spain, or full Spanish citizenship, including the privileges of paying taxes. Listen to that, including the privileges of paying taxes. So these bastards had the nerve to come into your territories, get you to convert into Catholic forms of Christianity. That was done by these Franciscan and Jesuit priests. Okay, these Dutch priests. And what they would do is convert the Aboriginals into Christianity, put you in the schools, and then they would take your land, divide it up, and give you full Spanish citizenship. And then this is the icing of the cake. The icing of the cake is now you can start paying taxes and tithes to Spain. And now you're being extorted by Spain. So it says that the land that will be later called New Mexico was the first center of mission activity in the Mexican Southwest. Now I want to pull you into something else. We already know about in Nevada, where they found a stone with ancient Arabic writing on it that dated back to around 700 AD. We already know about the Grand Canyons. We know about Arizona. We know about the different Egyptian relics and the different Egyptian cave cities. Okay, the different underground cities that the Egyptians had in the Americas that were located in the far west. We already know about the Caliph and Aborigines. Okay. And we're going to now find out about the tribe of Judah or the tribe of Utah in a minute. Okay. This is what I want you to look at now. A pretty good website that I use to kind of understand what the root word of a lot of this stuff is. It's called Online Etymology Dictionary. Okay. It's the Online Etymology Dictionary. Okay. So when I kind of want to understand what the root word is, it's in particular dealing with these consonants, you're going to have to come deal with this. But let's look at what Utah is. It says a United States territory organized in 1850 from Spanish Utah, name of the indigenous Utah Aztecan people of the Great Basin, perhaps the Western Apache, Uda High, in reference to living in the mountains. Okay, and we already also know that the western part of North America has a lot of mountainous regions. So first it says that it's the United States territory organized in 1850. So that means that in 1850, United States probably had fully seized it from Spain. Then it goes on to say that Utah is actually from the Spanish Utah. But in the Spanish, it's spelled Y-U-T-A, which is very, very interesting. And it says that this is the name of the indigenous Aztec people of the Great Basin. So they're saying that this name, Utah, is the indigenous name of the Utah Aztecan people of the Great Basin. Perhaps from the Western Apache, Uda, which means high in reference to living in the mountain. So that means that somewhere in the western part of North America, there was a people named Uda, and they may have been living in high mountainous regions. The word Uda sounds a lot like Judah to me. Just like you have the tribe of Judah or the tribe of Judah. or the tribe of Utah, or the tribe of Aztec, the tribe of Yucatan. So when we say the Yucatan, that's also the Yuda, or the Utah, or the Judah. So the same aboriginals of the Yucatan Peninsula are the same aboriginals of Utah, which are all the people of Judah. So now you see what this whole ancient Paleo-Hebrew connection is to the Americas. So when people say, you know, the Hebrews, this is just a language. Now, as far as what the people's name was and as far as what the indigenous name was, I don't know. I mean, you know, for y'all, you know, I don't expect, I mean, goddamn, y'all think I know all this shit? I don't know the fucking indigenous name. But clearly, you know, when I look through history and I look through a lot of these texts, I'm going to use whatever name that I see is associated with the people. Now, if these names are just, you know, pointing us in a direction we need to look, cool. So if the shit says Egyptian, Moor, Hebrew, or whatever, Muslim, I really don't care. I'm just trying to get to the root of what the shit is. But I said all that to say that there is some type of a connection between Judah, Utah, and the Aboriginals of the Americas, North America in particular. So continuing. It says that some Indians welcomed the missionaries as powerful witches capable of easing their burdens. Others tried to use the invaders as allies against rival tribes. Uh-oh. For all you niggas out there, oh, the Moors, they came overseas. Oh, the Moors in Europe, they sold us out. Oh, the Moors in Europe or in Africa, they had all those harems. Oh, y'all sleeping with them white women. Oh, y'all having all them mixed women. Oh, y'all stole our culture. Oh, y'all colonized us. Well, let's see what this shit said right here again. This shit says some Indians welcomed the missionaries as powerful witches capable of easing their burdens. Others tried to use the invaders as allies against rival tribes. Still others saw no alternative but to submit. The Indians living in Spanish New Mexico were required to pay tribute to their encomenderos and perform personal tasks for them, including sexual favors. Disobedient Indians were flogged by soldiers and priests. So not only were these priests coming out there and ritually sodomizing you spiritually by getting you to convert out your culture and religion into a foreign form of doing things, but they were out there physically raping the people. So it says that these people came out here when they came from the areas of Mexico, the areas of Peru, and they were coming farther north into, once again, New Mexico, California, Utah or Judah, etc. You now have Aboriginals here who encounter these bastards. But not all of these Aboriginals are on the same page, are they? Oh, no, they're not. Let's see what these Aboriginals are doing. Some of these North American Aboriginals are looking at these Jesuit high priests, these satanic priests, as powerful witches capable of easing their burdens. So you had some Aboriginals who said, hey, we got these people coming in here. I don't know who they are and I don't know what they want, but maybe they can make life a little bit easier for me. Then you had other Aboriginals who saw that these invaders could be used as allies against rival tribes. Don't that add to what the fuck I was telling y'all earlier about the archaeologists and what they found in Peru when the whole Spanish invaded, and they saw that not only did the Spanish, invade Peru because they found bullet holes in different skulls, but that the Spanish were even helped by other Native Americans because they were using the weapons and the same type of technology that the indigenous Incans had. So this proves my point that they didn't come here and just beat us one-on-one like that. It was always us fighting each other, just like it is now. Niggas fighting about, oh, Indians versus Aboriginals, or Moors versus Hebrews, or Egyptians versus RPG, and all this other bullshit you stupid ass niggas are on. While this pale Mankey sitting back laughing at all of y'all. But this shit is just sickening to me, man. And every time I see this shit, I'ma hype the fuck out of it. Just because you niggas want to keep arguing about this Aboriginal versus Moor shit like all Aboriginals were fucking cool. Then it goes on to say here that the Indians living in Spanish New Mexico were required to pay tributes. And then they had to even give them sexual favors. This sounds like sexual exploitation. So they sexually exploiting you all. And then I'm going to give you all this too. Some of y'all may wonder, well, Blackbeard, you sure do talk about sex a lot and sexuality. Why do you do that? Because that is where y'all's creative energy lies, people. That's why they want to pervert you all and contaminate you all so much in your sexuality. And what you all don't know that I know is that sex is a form of warfare. I'm going to tell you a scene I came across in a movie one time. I can't remember the name of the movie, so don't ask me. But there was a scene in the movie where it was the United States and they was like invading somewhere. And I almost want to say it was like Vietnam or something. But, you know, it was a scene where it was some pale Mankeys and they came across some women or whatever. And long story short, the two pale Mankeys were having a dialogue about the Vietnamese people. And long story short, what one of the pale Mankeys said he said, "This is my weapon." And he pointed to his private part, and then he proceeded to go and rape the woman. So you got to realize, man, that the sex is a part of the war, you know. And I primarily go in like that because I be wanting the women to know that if you don't stand up and fight for this shit, this is what the fuck you subjected to. Now, if y'all claim that all of y'all are not ghetto gaggers and y'all don't want to have nooses put on y'all neck and y'all don't want to have spit and fucking dog bowls and cauldrons of boiling vomit poured on your head, if you're not into that kind of stuff and you don't want to be treated that way, then bear witness to what the hell I'm sitting here saying. Because this shit is just facts. You know, it just is what it is. And it says that disobedient Indians were flogged by soldiers and priests. So it says that the priests were even killing people. So they were converting you into Christianity. And then if you didn't agree with what they wanted to do, then they would flog you or kill you. Okay? Where do I want to go now? But basically, it just viewed the Aboriginals as savage. I mean, y'all know that. Y'all know that. So what I'm gonna do now is a lot of us don't really understand why do we think we from Africa. Okay. What I'm gonna do is it's a Jewish archaeologist by the name of Melville Herskovits. Okay. You can go on down regular Google or regular whatever to find some basic information on this guy. Because once you understand this guy, then you'll understand why we don't know about this history as it pertains to North America and how we were already here. And we were being called the tribe of Judah or Judah. A guy named Melville Herskovits, and I'm going to just read a little bit about him. Melville Herskovits was an American, well, not American, but a Caucasian. I'm going to put my proper word in here. Melville Herskovits was a pale Mankey anthropologist who helped establish what he calls African and African American studies in American academia. He is known for exploring the cultural continuity from African cultures as expressed in African American communities. So first thing, keep in mind that this Jew by the name of Melville Herskovits is an anthropologist who helped establish African and African American studies in academia. So that means that everything that is included in the curriculum of what they call United States public education or academia, this guy Melville Herskovits and his anthropology had an influence. And his particular field of study is the field of African and African American communities. This is going to be very, very critical that you listen up. It goes on to say, in 1948, Melville Herskovits founded the major interdisciplinary American program in African studies at Northwestern University with the aid of a 3-year $30,000 grant from the Carnegie Foundation, followed by a 5-year $100,000 grant from the Ford Foundation in 1951. The program of African studies was the first of its kind at a United States academic institution. Let me repeat that. In 1948, Herskovits founded the first major interdisciplinary American program in African studies at Northwestern University with the aid of a 3-year $30,000 grant from the Carnegie Foundation, followed by a 5-year $100,000 grant from the Ford Foundation in 1951. This is key. Listen up. The program of African studies was the first of its kind at a United States academic institution. So this is what you need to get out of this. This guy, Melville Herskovits, founded African Studies, the first one at Northwestern University, with the aid of the Carnegie Foundation by giving him $30,000 and the Ford Foundation by giving him $100,000. Let me tell you all a little bit something about Blackbeard. Blackbeard is a major researcher, as you all know. And somebody who helped me a lot with my research is a brother by the name of Steve Coakley, okay? And Steve Coakley is one of these brothers who will put the names behind a lot of the key players involved. And a lot of the documentaries I've dealt with Steve Coakley, a lot of these people who are banking these government agents, a lot of these people who are banking these COINTELPRO agents, these so-called Negro agents, and a lot of these people who are financing and putting up the money to keep our people down, I hear the Carnegie Foundation come up and I hear the Ford Foundation come up. So you got to ask yourself this. Why would the Ford Foundation and the Carnegie Foundation give a total of $130,000 to a Jewish anthropologist so he can implement an African studies program in all United States academia? What would be the real benefit of that? And also salute to a brother named OG Chris. One thing that he told me that I always do is that when people got something going on, you should always ask yourself who's benefiting from this and what are they benefiting? So what does the Carnegie and the Ford Foundation benefit from Melville Herskovits putting out an African dogma or a so-called African American studies program in all the public schools that will one day include Aboriginal people who lost their identities? What does the Ford Foundation benefit from Aboriginal American people thinking that they are African? That's what I'm asking you. So then it says, Herskovits' book, The Myth of the Negro Past, is about African cultural influences on African Americans. It rejects the notion that the African Americans lost all traces of their past when they were, quote, taken from Africa and enslaved in America. He traced numerous elements expressed in the contemporary African American culture that could be traced to African cultures. So basically what this guy did was he wrote a book called Myth of the Negro Past that tried to connect the so-called black people to Africans and tried to show that when they went on the whole transatlantic slave trade that they didn't lose their heritage and they actually are from Africa. So when this was put into the school system, now all the teachers are teaching this stuff. So then when desegregation happens and now all our Aboriginal people are going to school, they're now being taught that they come from so-called Africa. So now it makes sense why the only people who know that we are indigenous to America are our oldest ancestors. Like, for example, the ancestor of my family that knows that we are indigenous Blackfoot Aborigine and that was able to tell my mother that is my mother's aunt. So that's my mother's father's oldest sister. So that's my great aunt. Okay. But my aunt, now mind you, so my great aunt knows that she's a Blackfoot indigenous American. But my aunt thinks she's from so-called Africa. You see what I'm going with this? So you got to ask yourself, why does the older person know that they are indigenous to the Americas? And why does the younger person think that they from Africa? Why does the older aunt know that she's indigenous to America? Why does the younger aunt think she's from Africa? I'll tell you exactly why. Because my aunt, who is younger, of course, than my great aunt, she went to school post segregation. She went when it was integration. And my great aunt more than likely knew that from oral tradition in the family. So that means that she was told she was a Blackfoot Aborigine by an even older ancestor that knew about it. And it was already in the family through that lineage of oral tradition. So my great aunt didn't go to Google. She didn't go to a book or anything like that. She didn't do the stuff that we doing to figure out what our history is. She knew she was a Blackfoot Aborigine based on oral tradition in the family. So she knew nothing about Africa. So my mother, when my mother told me that we were Blackfoot Aborigines, this is why I say that. Because my mother's father is my aunt's younger brother. So that means if she's the Blackfoot Aborigine, that means he is, because they had the same parents. So that means that the Y chromosome, at least from my mother, that's straight Blackfoot Aborigine. Now, as far as when my mother's mom Aboriginal tribe is, I don't know that one necessarily yet. And as far as on my father's side, I don't know what those are necessarily yet. But most of us are coming from various Aboriginal tribes. So what you're going to have to do as an Aboriginal, just figure out what one of them is. You know what I'm saying? Because your people may be Blackfoot, Choctaw, Udall, you know what I'm saying? And it may be like one other one, you know. But the point is that go ahead and figure out at least one of them and just go with that. So I don't know what all of them are, but you goddamn right I'm going to claim Blackfoot Aborigine because my great aunt told us that. And I go to my grave saying that. So I'm very, very proud to say I'm a Blackfoot Aborigine. This came from an ancestor. Didn't come from Google. Didn't come from a DNA test or any of that. And my great aunt died in the 90s. So she's been gone quite a while, people. So you got to ask yourself, why did the older ones know that we was Aboriginal Americans? And why do our mothers and our aunts and uncles, why do they think they from Africa? So just think about that a little bit. And maybe I'll leave y'all with that to kind of ponder on. You know, just ask yourself those questions. But it's the boy Blackbeard. I know y'all going to enjoy this one. I'm out.